How to sharpen scissors.
The first thing that I do is when a customer calls and they want scissors sharpened, I ask kind of material they cut, and if they're sewing in particular, I want them to bring the material in so I can test it, cutting a material that will squirt along the edge. In other words, as you're coming down, it will try to move out. Then you don't want to buff it. If you're doing like kitchen shears, you don't need to buff it. You can just grind it. So scissors are always ground only from this side. They're never ground in the inside here, where these two parts meet, because it'll move them further apart. So you're grinding them only from the edge that's on the angle where they two edges cross. So you're going to grind it. You're going to create a burr there. I'll show you how I do the grinding. I do the grinding either on the round part of the wheel or on the flat part. I create a burr, and then sometimes I just break the burr off. So let's say it's a kitchen shears. After I've got a nice burr created, then I just close the shears, and that takes and slices that burr off on both. Then I go back and I feel the burr is gone, and I've got a pretty sharp edge on there. Kitchen shears and those things don't need buffing. The dog hair is quite coarse, and it dulls the scissors a lot more. So for dog, I buff just a little bit. I want to keep some of the grind marks on it so the hair doesn't squirt along the thing, but I want it sharp enough to where it'll grab my thumbnail when I'm testing the edge. Human hair cuts easier, and I like to get it to where it's almost a razor edge, but at that stout angle. You're not going to cut it down to that 22 degrees. So the first thing, somebody will bring me, there's some expensive ones out there. There's scissors that cost $200–300. They're from Japan, and if I see those scissors coming in, you can normally tell because of the Japanese markings on it and all of that. If you sharpen those, you're going to void the warranty. Those have to be sent back to the factory. So I make the customer aware of that. Now, several of the customers now trust me with their scissors, and the warranty is void on them. But they bring these expensive ones to me, polish the edge, so it's almost like a razor edge that they're using, and it cuts very nice. Now for tough materials to cut, materials, well, if it's leather, I don't do any buffing on it. What I do is I leave the grinding edge on for leather. But if it's a thin material, this material here is very, very thin, and it is hard to cut, and I want it to cut both on the tip. I want it to cut way down, and so right now, as I'm cutting this, I see it's folding a little bit before it cuts way down here, although the tip is cutting good. So I would go back and I would resharpen down here because I see it starting to fold before it cuts. This is just a cheap throwaway scissors. I want them to be very happy with the material they're trying to cut, and that it cuts it very nicely, and then it'll last quite a while too. So I won't see them for maybe 3–4 months, depending how much sewing that they do. Sometimes the little thin threads, those little silk threads, they have trouble cutting them. They want to bend over on it. That's another thing that you test out. The other thing is the adjustment. So this adjustment, now this here is a disposable type scissors that has just got a Phillips screw that you just tighten it. There is an adjustment. This is the adjustment set here. It has a pliers in it like this, and it has the different screw heads. Now, I tried to get along without buying one of these. It was hard because there's a lot of different screws. This one here, this one has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This one has 8 different screwdrivers right here, and it's not the full set, but I get by with these 8, and they fit right down on top of the screw. So you clamp it right on the screw. You find that one that just fits it right, that there's no wiggle side to side, and it's just the right width. Then you clamp down on it, and what this thing does is it's got a ratchet up here that holds it in place, and it won't let you over tighten, but you can tighten it up to where that scissors is hard to move. Then I generally loosen it a little bit. Now, the people that are doing the hair cutting, either on the dogs or on the people, they do a lot of this with their hands, so they can't have almost no resistance on it, or they're going to end up with a sore hand. But if they're sewing, you want a little bit more resistance on that, so it cuts better. And some of those thin materials are very difficult to cut, so you want a little bit more tension in it. The other thing is if they drop the scissors have a bow in it as they're going out. So in other words, you look at the scissors and you can see more light coming through here than you can at the tip. And as you come down, the tips cross over on the top. So as you're going up, the tips are spreading out. That creates a little bit of that tension. So that's the way the scissors are designed. If they drop the scissors, they're going to spring them, and they might lose that cupping action to the thing. So you might have to try to bend it back. If scissors are sprung, there's not a whole lot you can do. You can try to work on them and everything, but if they aren't expensive scissors, then don't worry about it. Now, the adjustment on this one is just a rivet, okay? And it's got a little washer and a rivet here. It looks like it could be tightened with a screw, but it isn't. So then I just put it on an anvil, and I just tap on it. I'll show you. I got my vise set up over here. And I have a tack hammer that I use, and I just come down, and I want to just test it. I want to test it for play going this way. It's got some wiggle into it, but all scissors are going to have some. But when it starts coming together, now there's no wiggle. But that wiggle starts only when it's halfway up. So this one is a little bit on the loose side. So what I'll do is I'll come through. Okay, now it's about a quarter of the way up with stopping the wiggle. Okay, now it's wiggling down here, but when I get about here now, about like that is when the wiggle goes away. So a little bit tighter, I think. There we go. Now it's feeling nice and tight, and it still has the play. Look at how much play it's got here. But as soon as you start up in here, about when the edge of the cutting starts, that's when the wiggle is gone. The difference in the grinding is if you're grinding on the side of the wheel, then your grind marks are going to be perpendicular. So they will be running in this direction. And that will make it less likely for whatever you're cutting to squirt out. If you're grinding on this part of the wheel, like that, then the grind marks are parallel, and it is easier to buff the marks out because they're running with the long way. So if you're going to buff it, like I have a scissors here that I buff, which this is a scissors for cutting off bandages. So if you've got a bandage on or something, it's got a rounded part here that will not cut when you know, if you're trying to get under a bandage to cut it. That's the rounded part to go under. But you want it to be very sharp to cut because you have multiple layers. So you want to get it very polished. And so I do that on the wheel, on this side of the wheel, for both sides of the scissors, and then I go to the polishing operation. The angle that you use, you just close in the gap. That ends up probably being about a 30-degree angle, typically. So I'm going to sharpen these scissors right now. Because I'm using this side of the wheel, I want it to going in this direction for both. The buffing is always going in that direction, but for the grinding on the wheel, I like it going there, keeping the marks going away from you. You can slow it, speed down just a little bit. Feeling a little bit of a burr all the way along the edge. Now I'm feeling the burr along the edge. Close it, and I've just removed the burr off of both sides. I'm using the same angle for buffing because this is a hard wheel. There's no pillow action. So whatever angle that I'm grinding at, I buff at the same angle. I wipe off the buffing compound before I close the scissors because that will dull it. And then I test it, and it's grabbing my thumbnail very aggressively. A little bit more cleaning here before I close it. That's sharp. Along the side of the wheel is where I grind when I want the marks to be perpendicular and the material not to squirt out as the scissors close. So I'm just going to match that same angle. So I just bring it in so that gap closes. It doesn't close along the whole edge because this edge is not straight. So when I'm grinding it, I have to grind where I close the gap and then move it all the way up to where I grind that whole surface. So it's a rocking action. Now, because I'm using the side of the wheel, I want the sparks to go down. So I reverse the direction. Making sure that I've got the burr along the whole edge. Both sides of the scissors have the same angle on it. Now, this is my personal scissors for the shop, and I cut everything from, I use it for a tin snips. I cut wire with it. They're good hardy scissors, but I'm going to do a little bit of buffing on it. So I'm going to reverse the direction. Always the buffer goes away from you. Clean it off before I close it. For general scissors, generally buff it a little bit, not removing all of my grind marks. For doing tin snips, I do exactly the same way. And then when I'm doing the shears for the garden, for the hedge clippers, I do those on the side of the wheel, making the grind marks perpendicular, and I don't do any buffing on them. I want to keep it so the branches and leaves don't go squirting out of it. Tin snips the same way. I like to get a little sharper edge because they're cutting metal. So I do buff them a little bit, but I also keep the grind marks perpendicular on it. So I use the side of the wheel for the tin snips. Thank you.